Emerging Threats Hub. Quantum shadows and drone tides.
What if a rival power could see your most advanced stealth aircraft from 2,000 kilometers away? And what if a drone that costs less than a luxury car could threaten a warship worth over $1 billion? These aren't hypotheticals from a science fiction novel. They are questions being asked in defense ministries and think tanks around the world right now. They represent a fundamental tectonic shift in global security, a shift that is moving us away from 30 years of conventional military doctrine and into a new, more unpredictable era. On today's episode of Emerging Threats Hub, we're diving deep into this transformation. We will unpack the strategic implications of China's claimed quantum radar breakthrough. We will analyze the rise of asymmetric naval warfare, where cheap, intelligent drones are rewriting the rules of the sea. We will examine the surprising limits of economic sanctions as a tool of statecraft. And finally, we will explore how these pressures are forcing nations to reassess their alliances and their very own societies. This is about more than just new technology. It's about the emerging rules of deterrence, the changing calculus of conflict, and the urgent search for stability in a world where the old assumptions no longer hold true. Let's begin.
The quantum shadow is stealth obsolete.
For decades, the crown jewel of Western air power has been stealth. The ability of an aircraft like the American F-22 Raptor or B-2 Spirit to penetrate enemy airspace undetected has been a cornerstone of military strategy, a guarantee of air dominance. It works by absorbing or deflecting traditional radio waves, making the plane virtually invisible to conventional radar. But what if that advantage is disappearing? That is the provocative question raised by reports out of China regarding their development of something called quantum radar. Now, the science here is complex and the claims are as of now unproven on an operational scale. But it is the idea of quantum radar that has strategists so concerned. In simple terms, while traditional radar is like shouting in a very dark, echoless room and listening for a whisper back from the walls, quantum radar works differently. It leverages the principles of quantum entanglement, where two particles are linked, no matter the distance. The theory is that a quantum radar can send out entangled photons, and even if one is absorbed or deflected by a stealth aircraft, its twin particle back at the base station changes its state. This would, in theory, reveal the aircraft's presence, no matter how good its radar-absorbing coating is. Now, again, this technology is in its infancy, but the mere threat of its existence forces a complete strategic recalibration. If you are a military planner, you cannot afford to assume your $2 trillion investment in a stealth fleet is safe. You must plan for the possibility that it is, or soon will be, obsolete. This has immediate and profound implications for potential flashpoints, especially Taiwan. Any contingency in the Taiwan Strait is predicated on the United States maintaining air superiority. Quantum radar, if realized, would neutralize that edge, potentially upending the entire military balance in the region overnight. It's a classic security dilemma, driven not by an active deployment, but by a shadow of what might be. The shift in thinking has already begun.
The drone tide asymmetric warfare in action.
While quantum radar represents a potential high-tech paradigm shift, a much more tangible revolution is already underway on the world's oceans. It's being driven not by multi-billion-dollar programs, but by relatively cheap, commercially available technology. We're seeing the dawn of effective, lethal, asymmetric naval warfare. The clearest example is Ukraine's use of what they call the Sea Baby Unmanned Surface Vehicle, or USV. This is not your average hobbyist drone. It's a seafaring vessel, packed with hundreds of kilograms of explosives, capable of striking Russian naval assets in port or at sea. What makes it so revolutionary is its cost-effectiveness. For the price of one modern anti-ship missile, you can likely build dozens of these Sea Baby drones. This creates an almost impossible mathematical problem for a traditional navy. How do you defend against a swarm of fast, low-profile, expendable targets? The Black Sea Fleet, once a symbol of Russian power, has been repeatedly damaged and forced to relocate, demonstrating that a fleet's value can be severely degraded by an adversary willing to innovate on the cheap. This trend is accelerating with the integration of artificial intelligence. Take, for example, the Shield AI XBAT. This is a VTOL, that's vertical takeoff and landing drone, that acts as a loyal wingman. It can be launched by ground troops, fly ahead of a mission, identify and designate targets on its own using AI, and then feed that information back or engage itself. It's a collaborative, autonomous weapon system that multiplies the effectiveness of a single soldier or pilot. This is the convergence of two powerful trends: the proliferation of low-cost hardware and the exponential growth of AI. The result is that for the first time in modern history, non-state actors or smaller nations can project power in ways that were once the exclusive domain of major military powers. The drone tide is rising, and it's changing the very definition of naval superiority.
The blunt instrument, rethinking economic sanctions.
When faced with aggression, one of the first tools the international community reaches for is economic coercion. Since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the West has imposed the most severe and comprehensive sanctions regime in modern history on Russia. The primary goal, to cripple Russia's ability to fund its war machine by targeting its energy exports. However, recent analysis suggests this core objective is not being met. A U.S. sanction targeting Russia's oil revenues, for instance, has failed to deliver a knockout blow. Russia has adapted, finding new buyers in Asia and creating a so-called shadow fleet of older, uninsured tankers to transport its oil, circumventing Western restrictions. The war continues to be funded. This raises a critical question. If the primary strategic aim is unfulfilled, what purpose do the sanctions serve? This is where we must distinguish between symbolic and strategic value. There is no doubt that sanctions have created significant economic friction for Russia, forcing it to sell oil at a discount and complicating its logistics. In that sense, they have not been for nothing. But they have also proven to be a rather blunt instrument. They impose collective punishment, often affecting civilian populations more than the ruling elite, and they can have unintended consequences, like driving Russia closer to China and Iran. The persistence of these sanctions by Europe, despite their limited impact on halting the war, points to a commitment to a principle and a desire to signal resolve. But it also forces us to ask, could we be designing smarter, more targeted measures that are less about mass punishment and more about surgically disrupting specific military supply chains or financial networks? The Russian experience suggests that broad-stroke sanctions, while a powerful statement, are rarely a silver bullet.
The shifting alliances, Europe's quest for autonomy.
The confluence of these factors, the threat of disruptive technology, the clear limits of economic warfare, and the shifting focus of the United States toward the Indo-Pacific is creating a powerful sense of urgency in Europe. The result is a concerted, if challenging, push toward strategic autonomy. For years, European defense has been largely dependent on the NATO security umbrella, led by the United States. Now we are seeing national leaders across the EU publicly pledge to fill critical defense and industrial gaps by their self-imposed deadline of 2026. This is a massive undertaking, fraught with political hurdles, fragmented procurement systems, and bureaucratic delays. The ambition is clear, but the pathway to achieving it remains opaque. This is not just about building more tanks and jets. It's a deeper geopolitical realignment. A powerful example is the new strategic pivot between the European Union and Japan. This partnership is framed explicitly as a way to counterbalance China's leverage over critical resources, particularly rare earth minerals, which are essential for everything from smartphones to advanced military hardware. By collaborating with Japan on supply chains and technology, the EU is taking a concrete step to de-risk its economy and its defense industry from coercive tactics by a single power. This brings us to a crucial question of our time. Is Europe's quest for defense sovereignty truly viable without the traditional backing of the United States? Or is this a temporary, anxiety-driven response that will fracture under the pressure of implementation? The answer to that question will shape the security architecture of the entire Euro-Atlantic region for decades to come.
The human cost and future flashpoints.
It's easy to get lost in the grand strategy of quantum radars and geopolitical pivots, but we must never lose sight of the human cost. and the tangible societal impacts of these global shifts. A telling, and perhaps underreported, story comes from Croatia. The country has recently reversed a long-standing policy and is reintroducing military conscription. The plan is to call up 18,000 new conscripts every year. Why? Because of a growing perception of regional insecurity, fueled by the war in Ukraine and instability in the Balkans. This policy decision is a powerful signal. It means that a generation of young Croatians will have their lives shaped by defense preparedness in a way their parents did not. It's a direct, measurable impact of the broader security deteriorating on Europe's doorstep. This heightened tension is magnified in the world's most dangerous flashpoints. In Taiwan, the United States has issued explicit warnings about the risks of reckless leadership, a diplomatic way of expressing deep concern over potential miscalculation in the Taiwan Strait. When you pair that with the quantum radar threat and the rise of drone swarms, the risk of a rapid, uncontrollable escalation feels more present than ever. Compounding this is a trend of short-termism in foreign policy, where domestic political cycles and partisan battles erode the long-term patient diplomacy required to manage these great power rivalries. When diplomatic fatigue sets in, the space for miscalculation grows. The result is a world that feels more volatile, where the established tools for managing conflict seem to be losing their edge, and societies are being asked to bear a greater burden for their own security. So, where do we go from here? We've painted a picture of a world in transition, where stealth is threatened by quantum shadows, where navies are challenged by a tide of drones, where sanctions are proving blunt, and where alliances are fraying and reforming under pressure. It would be easy to conclude that we are heading toward a period of inevitable conflict, but that is not the only path. The emerging threats we've discussed today also create new opportunities for de-escalation, if we are wise enough to seize them. First, the rise of AI and autonomy demands a new global conversation on arms control. Just as the world came together to create non-proliferation treaties for nuclear weapons, we must now pursue international agreements on the development and deployment of lethal autonomous weapon systems. The goal is not to stop innovation, but to build guardrails that prevent catastrophic miscalculation. Second, we need to become more sophisticated in our use of economic tools. Instead of broad symbolic sanctions, the focus should shift to highly targeted measures that disrupt specific military logistics and networks, minimizing harm to civilian populations and maximizing strategic effect. And third, in an age of fast-moving technology and rising tensions, maintaining and expanding direct, high-level deconfliction channels between rivals like Washington and Beijing is not a luxury. It is a necessity. Open communication is the most reliable antidote to fear and misunderstanding. The future is not yet written. It is being shaped right now by the choices we make in laboratories, in parliaments, and in diplomatic backrooms. Our task is to understand these emerging threats not as harbingers of doom, but as signals demanding a more thoughtful, more principled, and more collaborative approach to ensuring a just and stable peace. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Emerging Threats Hub. I'm your host, Sebastian. You can find us online at emergingthreatshub.com and join the conversation using the hashtag #EmergingThreatsHub. Until next time, stay vigilant.